between the two of them.
The inside of Coates.
Watkins gets too heavily involved.
And that's Whitehead and Coates.
I know my destiny. I know my destiny. I know my destiny. I know my destiny.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the VRRC and the Cammus Simulation GTV3 Championship, which marches into the second half of the season. We've had 4 weeks of racing, 8 exciting races that have produced a variety of different winners and podium finishes. But now all eyes turn towards that championship run-in with just 8 races to go across 4 more challenging circuits. We are now really starting to hone in on who our potential champions could be. Andy McEwen here in the commentary box, back, thankfully, for the rest of the season, alongside Jack Oliphant, who did a sterling job in my absence a week ago of keeping this rabble in check. Jack, how well behaved were they for you at Kyle Army?
I was going to say, I don't know who told you that because they were awful. No, I'm kidding. It was, really good, entertaining race last week at Kyle Army. We've come out with some championship contenders, some drivers who maybe we're used to seeing right in the front. They had a little bit of drama in race number 2 coming together, actually, with 2 of them, but we'll get into that in a bit more detail in a couple of minutes' time. First of all, Andy's already mentioned, we've got 4 more tracks coming to you for the rest of the Cammus Simulation GTV3 Championship. We're at Watkins Glen, of course, at the moment, and then we head off to Japan for the Fuji Speedway and the Suzuka Circuit before we head on back to Blighty for good old Silverstone on the 22nd of March. So plenty of interesting and different circuits, Andy, out there that I'm sure these drivers are going to have to put some practice laps in to get to grips with.
Most certainly, yes. And even though a couple of them will be circuits that they have likely raced at before fairly extensively, I'd imagine Watkins Glen is one the drivers will be familiar with. Suzuka, Silverstone, of course, with most of our drivers being based in the UK, they will know that one. But it's the intricacies of these GT cars that they've been struggling with over the first 4 weeks, a few of them. And that is certainly something they will have to try and wrap their head around. Now, a week ago, as you can see, we were at Kyle Army in South Africa, definitely a track that has not been used that extensively here at the VRRC. And, well, I was half expecting, Jack, for the results from that week in my absence to have been a little bit shaken up because of that, but actually familiar names coming out on top.
Yeah, they absolutely were. We gave the driver of the round to the 3rd place driver out of the what you can see on screen. Anyway, Kyle Felvis, mainly because him and Joel Lask were extremely even throughout the evening, I should say, actually. And but Kyle just looked like he gave it a little bit more excitement. His body language in the car was very determined indeed. It was very enjoyable to watch. So Kyle Felder's got driver of the round, but Scott Bugner and Joel Lask did outscore them in the BMWs with a little bit more weight on, though, to those BMWs. I don't think they're enjoying Watkins Glen quite as much as we look at the practice times. But more on that in a couple of minutes' time because, of course, first, second, and third in Kyle Army, how is that translated into the championship? Well, on your screen now is exactly how it translates. It's Joel Lask who sits on top with 132 points. 6 points behind him is Elliot Dalton-Ayres, who, remember, had a brilliant week a couple of weeks ago now. And unfortunately, I think it was Monza, actually, Elliot Dalton-Ayres was stunning. Scott Bugner, he ended up having a little bit of a falling out with Eric Axelsson. Not in real life, of course. It's just on the track. Unfortunately, they had a little bit of a coming together in race number 2. Scott Bugner lost an awful lot amount of points because of that coming together. So he sits 10 points behind his teammates. Josh Martin, looking very quick on his return to the championship. He missed last week at Kyle Army, but he's back here at Watkins Glen, looking very fast indeed. And his teammate, Eric Axelsson, who, as I said, unfortunately had a bit of contact with Scott Bugner last week, didn't score as many points as we're used to seeing him. He's, again, back in the fast lane at wherever we are now, Watkins Glen. Oliver Gibson in 6th place, Nicky Taylor in 7th, Kyle Felvis is in 8th. He's having to make up an awful lot of points as he's had a bad first round and he missed the second round, I believe. Reece Bell, 9th, and Andy Carroll in 10th. So although you're saying, Andy, that the championship hasn't really mixed up, it's still very nice and close, especially between the top 6.
Exactly, which again, we're kind of getting used to now. It wasn't that long ago we'd be talking about championships into the second half of the season, and we'd already have kind of narrowed it down to 1 or 2 drivers who were likely to be contesting it at the end. But with so many points on offer per round, you definitely wouldn't want to count out any of that top half dozen in the points as we arrive here at Watkins Glen. Also, of course, I should say, we are fighting not only for points and honour, but for the usual plethora of prizes here at the VRRC. Jack already mentioned the Driver of the Round award that's dished out to a different driver every week. But for the top 5 places in the championship, some very, very good prizes on offer. The direct drive wheel, courtesy of our championship main sponsor, Cammus, going to the championship winning driver. The race seat for the second place in the championship, and the Aegon 27-inch display, the gaming display for our third place driver. Fourth place receiving 2 hours of driver coaching at the VRRC base down in the Midlands, and 1 hour of sim practice at the VRRC headquarters for our fifth place driver. Myself, Jack, Lewis, we all had a chance to head down there a few weeks ago and sample, I think, everything really that is up for grabs for these drivers, and I can say that it is well worth fighting for. We've also got new for this season the prize draw. All of the drivers that complete in at least 7 of the 8 championship rounds but finish outside of the top 5 in the points are entered into a prize draw for a chance to win one of 2 1-hour sim practice sessions at VRRC headquarters. So that is what they are fighting for then by the end of the season. We will be getting into that second half of the season momentarily with qualifying here at Watkins Glen. But first of all, let's take a look at the circuit that will play host to our 5th week of racing.
Hello and welcome to the 5th round of the Cammus Simulation GTV3 Championship. I'm Lewis Edwards and I'm going to take you around a lap of Watkins Glen. Into turn 1 down the gears, important to get the car rotated quickly and get a good exit. We've got a long flat out section coming up here. 2, 3 and 4 is easily flat out. You just want to use as minimal steering lock as you can get away with and then shift up through the gears at the optimal point. And this may also be where you can get a slipstream from those around you. Heading now towards the chicane, you want to use as much curb as you dare and carry that speed in, but make sure not to go too wide and don't end up on the grass on the right there. Long right-hander of 5 now, just balance it, and then when you think you can pin the throttle, go all the way. And then back over to the right-hand side for 6. Really easy to unsettle the car too much on this apex curb, so avoid that at all costs. Use up the curb on the exit. 7 you can brake incredibly late for, as it's very uphill. Careful for a snap on the entry there. And then just be a little careful on the power. You can't use up quite as much road as you think there. As we're now on the back straight, heading towards turn 8. Down the gears. Get it rotated. Bit of a later apex there. Be careful of track limits on the exit there. Don't want to go more than 2 wheels over. Now we've got 9. Very easy to start sliding the car through here. Be careful not to do that, as then it'll compromise your run through the next couple of corners. 10 is very fast, fairly simple corner. We go into 11, the final corner. Use the curb to rotate it slightly, pin the throttle and get as close to that wall as you can. And that completes a lap of Watkins Glen.
So the Watkins Glen International Circuit, and the full version of Watkins Glen, that is then the one that will be used for things such as the IMSA Sports Car Championship, which is not my personal favourite layout here at Watkins Glen, I must admit, but it does have a couple of really interesting sections that run up the hill at the start of the lap here at the bus stop chicane, or the interloop as the Americans often call it. Very, very tricky, narrow section of track. It is a demanding circuit, Jack, and one that I find always suits quite smooth drivers. That's perhaps why I've never really got on with it too well. You do have to have a very smooth driving style to really extract the maximum, particularly through these tight corners out the back.
Yeah, it's a difficult track in my opinion. It's one that I didn't actually know too much about, I'll be honest, before I got into sim racing. It seems that's been my introduction to Watkins Glen, and it's extremely popular on the, well, not to be mentioned too often on a VRRC broadcast, iRacing platform, isn't it? Where if you're even as jumping into the MX-5s, you'll end up probably doing the shortened version of Watkins Glen quite a few times in your races, but it's very, very popular, and it's well suited to these GTV3 cars, especially the sort of opening couple of sectors, and there's a lot of elevation changes. I think that's maybe why you do have to be super smooth, super patient on the power, especially with these really powerful GTE cars. You end up having to, spin the wheels a lot, or you end up fighting the front end to try and keep it in grips. And I remember Lewis saying last week that the curbs are pretty much death, apart from potentially the bus stop chicane, for a lot of these cars around this circuit. So there's lots of little intricacies that the driver's going to have to keep an eye out on.
Absolutely, and lots of corners that sort of goad you into carrying a bit too much speed through them, because really, with the exception of this really tricky downhill braking zone at turn 1, lots of the corners have uphill approaches, particularly out the back, and that really tempts you into just trying to carry a bit too much speed towards the apex, and that can occasionally go wrong, it must be said. Now, speaking of things going wrong, it's been far from the usual silky smooth ride through the season for this man, hasn't it? Eric Axelsen, who, remember, back at the start of the season, won both of the races at the Bahrain season opener from pole position, has not visited the podium once since then, and Jackie's only had one top 5 since Bahrain. What on earth is going on?
To be honest, it's one of those mysteries that just pops up in motorsport every so often where you can't really explain it. So you can't exactly say that the car's changed or developed, like the F1 drivers always have that excuse, don't they? But yeah, here the cars are exactly the same as what they were. It just seems to be out braking himself a little bit too much, especially around Istanbul. I remember it was a common practice for him almost, and yeah, after the first round I was ready to sort of write off the championship and everybody else is fighting for second, but maybe he just wants to keep it interesting. You never know, but I'm glad to see him right at the sharp end again. He's getting that Corvette really well tuned, and I have to say his teammate actually through practice, Josh Martin, he was the driver to be beating actually, so both of those guys are going to be looking really strong tonight. Looks like Josh hasn't quite put his lap together yet. He's currently sat in 5th position, sorry, just ahead of Nicky Taylor and just behind the BMW of Joel Lask, but I would expect him to be a little bit higher up the order come the end of the next 9 minutes.
Yes, likely will be the case. Comes across the line there, does Josh Martin, was 5th. And that was an improvement, but not enough, actually, to improve upon 5th position. Still 6/10 off, but only fractionally, less than half a tenth, about 100th of a second or so slower than Joel Lask, and about the same amount, again, slower than Kyle Felvis, who's up there in 3rd place at the moment. It's Axelsen on pole by 0.4 of a second over Scott Bugner. That's much more like it for Eric. But remember, one of the themes of this season has been the ever-changing track conditions through qualifying. It's something that we've been experimenting with a little bit here at the VRRC of late, starting the track conditions a little bit below optimal at the beginning of qualifying, and then the idea is that the more laps are completed, the more rubber that's put down, the quicker the track gets. So from a spectator's perspective, that has done wonders really for making qualifying one of the most exciting parts of the night, because the track gets faster with every minute, and that means that often it's those very last laps that are the fastest, and that's a real challenge for the drivers, because although it's a 15-minute session, it's really those final couple of minutes, Jack, where they have to be on their A game.
Exactly, yeah, and you might think, well, what's the point in going out there until the last sort of 2 or 3 minutes? But the problem is, if no one goes out for 13 minutes, the track doesn't change its state at all, and all of a sudden you might as well be going out in the first 3 minutes and setting your lap time. So you really do need to get out there, get the track up to temperature, but get yourself back into the rhythm as well. They've just had drivers briefing, then they have maybe 1 or 2 laps where they're sort of like just running around until qualifying starts sort of thing. So you're not really in the right frame of mind, and I always think qualifying, it's a frame of mind by this point. To put it in perspective, Kyle Felvis, I think, had done 37 laps in practice, whereas Kenny Press had done 235 or something. So, you know, by the time you get to qualifying, you've done the practice you need to do. They've had a week to get on the server and do whatever they need. It's just a mindset now. And for me, particularly, it takes 7 or 8 minutes to get into that rhythm, to be able to get into the sort of aggressive state of mind that you need to attack a qualifying session. And even though you do need to be patient around Watkins Glen, the track still needs to be attacked.
Yeah, absolutely, and perhaps a bit too much attack there into the uphill right-hander. That is one of those corners I was talking about, an uphill approach, and so easy just to outbrake yourself, try and carry a bit too much speed through there, and that is what we saw a little there from Scott Bugner. You can sometimes rescue the situation, though, by taking a late apex. That's another interesting element of this particular circuit. Lots of these corners have, they're so long, and they've got sort of multiple apexes that you can take, and Scott Bugner perhaps able to salvage that, because that was a purple sector, even with what looked like a little mistake. Just dips the wheel on the grass coming through the left-hander that brings you back onto the short circuit. He was second. He's now been dropped down to 3rd, though, because his BMW teammate Joel Lask has gone 2nd. This looks like it might be an improvement, though, for Scott Bugner, who brings the car across the line and, yes, jumps straight back ahead of his teammate and gets now to within a 10th of a second of pole.
Yeah, Eric Axelsen on that last lap was only 200th of a second off Scott Bugner's fastest lap. So it just goes to prove that Eric's got it in the locker, not only on one flying attempt, he's got it in multiple laps. So he's going to be dangerous when it comes to the race. And we've had intel from Lewis, who obviously does the broadcast and everything, Lewis Edwards, that apparently the tyre management is going to be extremely key in this particular race. The overheating of these tyres is a big problem at Watkins Glen. So the drivers who are smoothest, i.e. the two we always pick on, are Eric Axelsson and Josh Martin, the two teammates. They're going to be not only fast in one lap pace, we expect them to be able to get those tyres the distance as well. I don't think the softs are quite going to manage the full 20 minutes.
Interesting, isn't it, that we lump Josh Martin into the smooth driver club when he's sideways most of the time,
yes.
but he seems to do it quite smoothly somehow, and you're right, he always comes on strong at the end of the race, which is when that smooth driving style really pays you back, because you've looked after the tyres and you've got that long run pace that you need to challenge at the end of these 20-minute races. They're not long races by any stretch of the imagination, but they're long enough on the soft tyre in particular that may become a bit of a factor today, because this is a very high-speed track and there are lots of quite long, quite high-speed corners where you're just scrubbing the surface of the tyre across the road, and you can see it there as we followed Oliver Gibson down through the right hander, the front of the car just washing out ever so slightly as he perhaps asks a little bit too much of the left front tyre. Oliver Gibson down in 9th place at the moment, but is top 6 in the points, and the last of the drivers in the 100 club. He's just about scraped into triple figures as far as his points haul is concerned. He's within 30 points of the championship lead. Would have been hoping for a bit better than 9th, though, if he was to really start building a championship challenge through the second half of the season.
Yeah, slightly surprised that he isn't a little bit higher up, to be honest, Oliver Gibson, and he comes across the line, doesn't improve that time round either. 1.3 seconds is a bit further off pole position than we used to seeing him, I should say, over the course of the of this championship. So a little bit surprising, but there is still 3.5 minutes to go. We could get in, maybe put some new tyres on, maybe go out for one more flying lap. Here's Josh Martin, not faster in sector 1, but and I don't know if this is correct. I would be absolutely astonished and amazed and hold my hands up, but Reese Bell has just gone purple in sector 1 with a 23.531. He's all the way down in 14th place. And I do apologise, Reese, for my sound of amazement, but I don't think we've ever seen that Aston Martin qualify within the top 10. So that would be absolutely astonishing if we see a quick lap time out of him. And Elliot Dalton has just gone purple sector 2. That track progression is starting to get hotter and hotter.
You're absolutely right. Reese has been very consistent in qualifying. 3 times he's qualified 11th place. They were the last 3 rounds. He was 13th at Bahrain in the season opener. So at the moment, actually on course for his worst qualifying of the season so far. But as we've said, that is likely to change on this latest lap. Josh Martin there improving up into 4th place. Demotes Kyle Felvers down to 5th. But let's see what Reese Bell has got. He makes his way towards the penultimate corner now. Then at turn 10, this quite fun pair of corners, actually, both of them with a bit of positive camber, a bit of banking on the road, which allows you to carry the speed through the corners a little bit more. And then into the right-hander at the end of the lap. Kyle Felvers back into 4th position now. Reese Bell's time we will see shortly appear on the timing tower, and he goes 10th, which immediately becomes 11th because Paul Haramy manages to pip him as well. But we're now really into that phase of the session, Jack, where the track is starting to come to the drivers. Everybody, apart from Oliver Gibson, interestingly, out on track right now, and we're likely to see times continue to tumble.
Yeah, Josh Martin and Elliot Dalton has just gone green in their respective sector 1s as well. And to be honest, I was surprised that Reese Bell's time didn't get him a little bit higher. Actually, it's nice to see him crack into that sort of top 10, even if it was only for a moment. But interestingly, that actually demotes Oliver Gibson down into 12th place, and we were saying that he was in 9th when we were focusing on him. He's all the way down in 12th. That's really not the qualifying session he was hoping for. With 1 minute and 30 seconds to go, I think he's just come out the pit. So it's going to be an ambitious one to try and get one flying lap in. Eric Axelsson is on an extremely flying lap. He's gone purple in sector 1 to take that accolade away from Reese Bell. Josh Martin and Elliot Dalton, as I said, have gone quicker in sector 1 as well. So is Nicky Taylor. It's all coming down to the next 1 minute and 10 seconds. What have they got in the locker as Andy Carroll also goes green?
Yeah, let's see then. Here comes Josh Martin. He will come through with 1 minute to go, so he's still got time to put another lap in, and that is good timing, I think, because he goes 4th, and arguably the track should be even quicker now as he goes through onto his final circuit of the Watkins Glen International Circuit. Here comes Eric Axelsson then. At one point, he was 4/10 up the road from everybody else, but as he makes his way through turn 8, the heel, and up towards this really tricky left-hander at turn 9, he could do with trying to extend upon this 8/100th of a second advantage that he's got over Scott Bugner right now. Through the left-hander he goes, then Axelson pushing hard. Bugner's going quickly as well, so too is Joel Lask, and we need to keep an eye out for Josh Martin as well. Scott Bugner in particular, we're hearing, is going very, very quickly, so this will have to be quite some lap for Axelson. He just missed the apex slightly there through the final corner, and the driver who led the championship after the first 2 races of the season, well, will he start from pole here tonight? If he will, it is not based upon that most recent lap.
Yeah, in fact, he was 3/10 down on Scott Bugner's middle sector, which was, of course, purple, but Scott crosses the line and doesn't improve his overall time. So at the moment, Eric is safe on pole position, but for how much longer? Joel Lask and Josh Martin both not gone green in sector 1, but Nicky Taylor seems to be going quite quick. Alok Iyengar is putting his best lap as well. He secures himself 9th position with Kenny Press breathing down his neck, but I think about 0.3 of a second behind as we focus on Josh Martin, who's stopped on the side of the road, and we know we're not allowed to do that. Andy, is that going to be a punishment going his way?
Well, as long as he doesn't fast track back to the pit lane, he's at least got out of the way, hasn't he? Perhaps he'd underfueled the car and didn't realise he was potentially going to get that last lap in, but that is significant. It means he won't be able to capitalise on the track that is, in theory, in the best condition it's been all session. Ethan Hill is, though, and he jumps up into the top 10. 9th fastest for him, knocks Kenny Press down to 10th, and Paul Laramie outside of the top 10, and Paul in the pit lane already, so won't be improving. Here is Kenny Press, who Jack mentioned had been doing lots of practice laps. He's not going to improve this time, though. He's keeping to the right there and pulling into pit lane. So who else might still be able to improve? Well, not Elliot Dalton Ayres, because he's following Kenny into the pits as well. So it looks as though this is all going to work out for Eric Axelson then. All of his big challengers really have either not been able to improve or bailed from the session altogether. Carl Felvis is doing exactly that, heading for the pit lane. And it looks as though Jack, Andy Carroll with a big spin coming out of the penultimate corner, looks as though Eric Axelson is going to hang on.
Yep, and just to clarify my Josh Martin remark earlier on about him potentially facing a bit of a punishment, they're allowed to stop on circuit, but they're not allowed to go back to the pits under any assistance, whether that be being pushed or whether that be using the fast travel button, basically, back to the pit lane. So, yeah, as long as he just stays there until the session ticks over, I don't think he should face any punishment as Nicky Taylor wipes himself out into the pit. But as the checkered flag drops, we've got race 1 coming up on your screens in a couple of moments' time, and a quick chat to our pole position man. We haven't seen him in a while, Eric Axelson. Back in a sec.
Welcome back, everyone. Qualifying done here at Watkins Glen for the Cammus Simulation GTV3 Championship here at the VRRC. And, well, finally, Eric Axelson has managed to get himself back to a position from which he is very comfortable and very used to starting, and that is pole position for our first race of the night. Eric, your first pole position since Bahrain at the very start of the season. We were just discussing how the middle part of this season has not gone particularly well for you. How confident are you that you can start to turn that around here tonight?
Well, yeah, the last 3 rounds has been quite terrible. I hope I can turn it around this week. Really, I really like the track, and the car feels great around here. So, yeah, I hope this is the turning point.
You managed to put that lap in the qualifying session very early, actually. We were discussing through the session how the track gets quicker with every lap that's completed, and in theory, that means the fastest laps really should come at the end of the session. But you managed to pull that out very early on. Were you surprised that that lap stuck and that perhaps other people struggled to improve towards the end?
Yeah, actually I was, but at the same time I couldn't like beat myself either, because I was making mistakes, and that chicane is a little tricky to get right, especially when you're on a hot lap. If you like want to put a perfect lap in, it's easy to make a mistake through the chicane. So yeah, a little surprised, but yeah, I think it was a good lap.
Starting from pole position then, best of luck for this first race, Eric, and hopefully we will see you back on the podium again later on tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
So Eric Axelsen then will start from pole position. As I said, Jack hasn't been inside the top 3 since that dominant start to the season back at Bahrain. What do you think his chances are of perhaps putting that right here tonight? He's starting from the best place possible.
He is, and he is one of the best starters that we have on the grid, of course. We always go on about it, but he really is. It's always amazing to see him get off the line. And I think with that in mind, I'm going to put my money on the fact that he'll go into the turn 1 in the lead. And if he can get all the way uphill through the bus stop chicane and to that sort of sharp, it's not really sharp, is it? That sort of long hairpin right at the top of the hill, I think he'll be fairly safe. I think everybody's going to start falling over each other behind him. That's my non-professional opinion anyway. One thing to point out before we get going, Andy, is the fact that obviously there is a tyre choice available to the drivers. Eric Axelsen, Scott Bugner, Joel Last, Josh Martin, our top 4, they're on medium tyres. Kyle Felvers appears to be on the soft tyres. Then you've got Elliot Dalton-Ayres and Nicky Taylor. They're on mediums as well. Alok Iyengar, he's on softs. And then you've got pretty much a mix all the way down the grid from there on. But that's going to be a very interesting sort of dynamic to see if Kyle can make those soft tyres last. There is about a second in it, we believe, in lap time. So is he going to push that hard, or is he going to be conservative trying to make them go the distance?
Well, that is going to be a challenge, as we've discussed already. It is not easy to look after those tyres here at Watkins Glen, and so the temptation is to push them quite hard in the early stages. But as we've said, they'll be punished for that later on in the race. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the first few laps of the race go, and I suspect a lot of it will come down to the situation that you find yourself in. If, for example, Eric Axelsen can get off the line in his usual way and disappear up the road at the start, leaving everyone else to fall over each other behind, he can then afford to manage the tyres a little bit. You don't have to rocket off into a 5-second lead. You can just manage that gap, manage the situation, and manage the tyres. Whereas if you end up involved in a all-out brawl in the opening laps, which can be the case, then there tends not to be a lot of tyre saving going on there. So this will be an intriguing start to the race, I think. And yeah, hopefully will be one of those races where we do see some comers and goers. We see some drivers excel at the start and some do a little bit later on, because actually we've not seen a huge amount of that. We've seen the tyres make a little bit of a difference at previous rounds, but I do reckon that tonight could be the night where the tyres really take centre stage.
Yeah, and I've just sort of noticed as well, I was about to point out that Scott Bugner and Joel Lask, they could work together and try and be smooth, almost slingshot each other and all those sort of things to try and keep the tyres within the best temperature and also get them going quickly. But it's actually Mean Green Racing Team on pole position and in 4th place, and there's a nice sandwich in the middle of LB Motorsport. So yeah, there's only 2 teams in the top 4. Both teammates from both teams are securing those positions. So going to be an interesting dynamic.
Is indeed. Let's see how that plays out then on the downhill run to turn 1 as we get ready to go racing. The second half of the season in the Cammus Simulation GTV3 Championship about to kick off here at Watkins Glen International. The red lights go on. They go out now, and Eric Axelsen does make his typical good start. But look at Josh Martin, his teammate coming through. In fact, the Ford GT of Elliot Dalton-Ayres also away well. It will be Axelsen who leads, but who will be second? Will that be Bugner or will it be Martin? It's Josh Martin trying to go the long way around. In fact, that's Lask that he was side by side with, because Scott Bugner has had a nightmare. He's down into 7th place from the front. row of the grid. So real contrasting starts there, and Scott Bugner on those medium tyres, as most of the front runners are, really struggling through the first few corners.
Yeah, as Josh Martin looked at the inside of the other BMW of Joel Lask, and I thought Carl Felvis was going to try and make it almost 3 wide into it, as Nicky Taylor loses out. Potentially, where's Scott Bugner going? He's just driving all over the place at the moment. He's struggling, and he gets overtaken by the other BMW on the grid, Alok Iyengar, the only BMW that is not part of the LB Motorsport crew. Nicky Taylor enjoying himself in 6th place. We've seen him on the YouTube chat saying that his qualifying time is about as quick as he's going to go all evening. Well, you don't need to go particularly quickly in the race. You just need to finish in a decent position. They are two very different things, and we know Nicky Taylor, he enjoys a good, strong race. He does. As Alok Iyengar again goes a bit narrower through the hairpin back up the hill. But yeah, big story at the beginning, Andy, is the fact that Scott Bugner really is nowhere at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Then, as you said, made a small mistake through the inner loop and had his pocket picked well and truly by Alok Iyengar, who is on the soft tyres. So that explains why that sort of turquoise and blue BMW is so racy right now, and he's chopping the nose off of Scott Bugner as they make their way through the left-hander at turn 9. So an eventful opening lap of the race then coming towards its conclusion, and Eric Axelsen, so far so good. He's maintained the advantage out in front. 7/10 of a second is his lead over Joel Lask in second, with Josh Martin crucially up into 3rd place as well. So from a championship perspective, good news that for Josh Martin, but he could really do with getting ahead of Joel Lask, who, remember, is the points leader.
Yeah, all of a sudden I was talking about LB Motorsport versus Mean Green Racing Team, and it's just Joel Lask has just lost his teammate basically in that attack, hasn't he? Eric Axelsen and Josh Martin, I'm sure, will be probably thinking about ganging up on Joel, but Eric Axelsen, he'll have his own agenda. He'll want to get gone. He needs the point himself. He is getting going as well, by the way. There's no messing around from him. As we look a little bit further back for the alarm company Porsche, as Nicky Taylor tries to go around the outside of Elliot Dalton-Ayres, who fires himself all the way over those curbs, and we know that the Porsche doesn't like riding the curbs, so Nicky has to be a little bit more careful than the Ford GT just ahead of him, and Elliot holds on to that top 5 position for the time being.
Yeah, Dalton-Ayres, remember, second in the points coming into tonight after what's been a real purple patch that he's found. He's really getting on well with this car. He's had himself a couple of race wins, which of course came back at Istanbul, where he actually also had a perfect night. 2 race wins from a pole position in race 1, and he's in 5th position, fending off Nicky Taylor right now, both of them on medium tyres. Carl Felvis, remember, is on the softs, and he is the one who is really closing in on Josh Martin. Martin's struggling to stick with Joel Lask, and he's now got that soft tyre shod Porsche right behind. The question, though, is, Jack, how long can Carl Felvis maintain this attack for before those tyres start to go south?
Well, a lot of people at home might be thinking, well, if Kyle gets ahead of Josh, then that's not the end of the world, because Josh's tyres will come back in and he'll just be able to overtake him later on. It's not necessarily, that's not the end of the world for Josh. It's the fact that he will lose time on Joel Lask, and he will have to spend a couple of quarters probably trying to get past Kyle Felvis if the tyres drop off at the extent that we expect them to. Josh really needs to stay ahead of Carl for all it's worth, to then not have to worry about him later on and then go forward and attack the BMW again. Maybe Joel, we saw last week at Kyalami, is prone to a mistake here or there. Kyle Felvis wasn't quite close enough to take advantage, unlike Scott Bugner, who's taking advantage of a little bit of a wide moment there by Alok Iyengar, and up the hill, the 2 BMWs swap positions.
Yes, they do, and that was a long time coming, really, for Scott Bugner. He could have done without this battle with Alok Iyengar, who is trying to come back at him now towards the inner loop, but he's not going to be quite close enough, so now Bugner gets his head down and tries to chase after the Elliot Dalton-Ayres Nicky Taylor battle that is raging ahead. If Bugner could salvage a top 5 from this race, that would at least be something, but you feel he's perhaps going to have to start looking ahead to that second race later on. 1 race victory this season so far for Scott Bugner, which he took a week ago at Kyalami. Interestingly, every driver so far who has qualified on pole position for race 1 has gone on to win that opening race of the night. That's a good over for Eric Axelsen. That is not good news, though, for Elliot Dalton-Ayres, who loses it going up the hill, and that is crucial for the man second in the points.
Yeah, fair play to Nicky Taylor for managing to avoid that, not go on the grass, and also not cause a bit of a pile-up behind him, but he is going to be overtaken. No, he isn't. He dives into the corner, maybe a little later on the brakes than he would like, but he gets it all hooked together. But massive story there for the Ford GT. Elliot Dalton-Ayres, maybe that purple patch started to come to an end. It happens to the best of us as Alok Iyengar goes a little bit wide.
Yeah, that is a shame, though, isn't it? He could have done without a poor result here. Nothing to say that he will have a poor result. He's down in 11th, but he's got the best part of 15 minutes, I suppose, to try and get that time back, because Nicky Taylor almost scrapes the wall coming off the final turn, but carrying the maximum speed onto that pit straight is important for keeping yourself out of trouble down into the braking zone at turn 1, which he succeeds in doing. So, lots of storylines already, as has so often been the case this season, but it's always the way, isn't it, Jack? You get into the second half of the season and suddenly these little moments, these little action points that happen to our championship front runners, they take on extra significance, just like this battle is for 5th place.
Yeah, I thought Scott Bugner, with all that weight on board, he might struggle up the hill here at Watkins Glen, and to be fair, it looked like he was catching, and then maybe the Porsche just decided that it had a little bit less weight in it all of a sudden, and thought, oh god, oh yeah, I probably got an extra horsepower or two. As BMW trying to go around the outside is very, very ambitious. Nicky Taylor trying for all his might to hold on to that 5th position for the time being. It's going to be a little bit of a train that's forming behind them, though, isn't it? With Alok Iyengar, Ethan Hill, and Oliver Gibson lining up with, is that Kenny Press in the background of the Chevrolet? Yes, it is as well. Kenny Press is going well.
Yeah, inside the top 10 is the Triple H Chevy, just ahead of Elliot Dalton-Ayres. Well, I say just ahead, 2.7 seconds ahead of Elliot, who hasn't gained any time since that spin he had a lap ago. And I wonder whether that's maybe overheated those tyres slightly to the point that he's now going to struggle to close in on this group. However, one thing that will help him close in on this group is a defensive Nicky Taylor, and I think that's something that we are about to see. Nicky clearly hasn't got the pace here. He is struggling, by his own admission, to get to grips with that Porsche. This isn't the best of tracks, I don't think, for the Porsche either. And that was John Jones getting very sideways, but Nicky Taylor, I think, is going to have to really start fighting a rearguard action, and if he does, that has the potential to spark some action behind.
Yeah, well, if you sort of listen to Nicky Taylor, then he'd probably say that a lot of the tracks aren't Porsche favoured, but the argument is to say that that Kyle Felvis is in 4th place, one ahead of him, and he is running in the top 5, so the Porsche is clearly not out of favour here. I think now all of a sudden he's got a little bit of a gap. Maybe he can get some rhythm into the car, maybe focus on not scrubbing the tyres, and he'll pull away slightly from the rest of the pack behind. Maybe he'll drag Scott Bugner along, but that's mainly down to Scott's overall pace. We know he's out of position, and all of a sudden Alok Iyengar's got a bit of a problem with yet another Porsche as Ethan Hill lines up the blue BMW. Doesn't get the job done through the chicane, but has he forced him offline? No, not quite. Oliver Gibson all of a sudden fancies having a go.
So easy to lose your momentum through that inner loop, though, and cause a bit of a stack up behind. That's almost what happened with the two Porsches getting very close to each other indeed. I think we're reaching the part of the race, perhaps, where those soft tyres are starting to go off, though, because Iyengar, as you've said, is dropping back from Bugner. He's under threat from Ethan Hill, and the same sort of thing starting to happen to Kyle Felvis. He's dropped over a second behind Josh Martin now, who incidentally is lapping quicker than Joel Lask at this point of the race. The good news, though, for Felvis is that Nicky Taylor, his longtime teammate, is defending and keeping everyone else at bay. So even if Kyle does start to run out of tyres and run out of pace, he's got the best part of a 4-second cushion to sit back on before he starts coming under pressure from those behind.
Yeah, and although he'll want Nicky Taylor to do well, even if they aren't direct teammates, they pretty much are. They're a sister team, aren't they, really, the Alarm Company, because you're only allowed 2 drivers in a team here at VRRC, and Ethan Hill is Kyle Felvis, technically, I think, teammate. I think I'm right in saying that. But he'll hear that Scott Bugner's putting a lot of pressure on Nicky, and that will, again, work in the favour of Kyle. He'll be relatively pleased about that. He'll, of course, want Nicky to finish 5th over Scott, but he won't be too disappointed to hear that they're going to be slowing each other up, hopefully, for the next 5 minutes or so. But it's been a good battle between these two. You wouldn't be surprised to see these two drivers and these two names fighting for race wins, would we? But it's not really been Nicky Taylor's season, Andy. Maybe he hasn't been able to put as much time into the car as he would like, and maybe he's a front-wheel drive specialist by nature. Not entirely sure, but we're used to seeing him fighting for championships, and at the moment, it just seems to be somewhat of a slight former shadow of potentially his former self.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of truth to that. I think the other thing that's happened, though, over recent times at the VRRC is that the grid has just got stronger.
True.
You know, 3 or 4 seasons ago, you look at this list of drivers, who would you expect to be fighting for a championship? Well, Eric Axelson, I suppose, he was just starting to go into his prime as the timing tower makes my heart skip a beat there just for a second, but Eric Axelson is still leading by 1.6 seconds. But yeah, a few seasons ago, you'd have been talking about Eric Axelson and Nicky Taylor fighting for a championship with Kyle Felvers perhaps as the underdog. These days, you've got at least 6 drivers regularly winning races, regularly finishing on the podium, and regularly ending up at the end of the season in contention for the championship. We've got more drivers now starting to get into that fight as well. People like Elliot Dalton-Ayres, people like Oliver Gibson, Ethan Hill, when he's having a good day, is just as quick as those front runners as well. And I think that is a sign that things are working well at the VRRC right now. Not only that the drivers are getting better, but things like the success ballast and the compensation weight system that we use, that is working well. The driver rankings are working well. It's bringing more people into play. And that can only be good news for us watching on, because it generates really good racing and really intriguing championship battles.
Yeah, and I think it also does something that you don't necessarily see as much as sort of casual sim racing. Obviously, we like to think of ourselves here at VRRC as being that step up from, you have the casual sim races. We're the step up where you have live stewarding and you have obviously the broadcast and everything like that. I think you see a lot of people wanting to do better, putting the time in, putting the effort in to make themselves quicker and better racers. And it's coming on strong here is Scott Bugner, who again, up until this championship, we wouldn't have really been speaking about in terms of expecting him to be winning, and we're almost disappointed that he's not in the top 5. So it's that drive and ambition from all of these drivers up and down the grid to be able to push themselves to get better, putting 200 plus laps in every week to be able to master the car and master the track. It's something that really excites us as broadcasters, and hopefully excites the drivers as well to push on.
Oh dear, Nicky Taylor getting a bit too excited there as he went into the uphill right-hander. Again, the front of the Porsche just not biting, is it? The rear-engine Porsche often can fall victim to a little bit of understeer. Interestingly though, Nicky has taken a bit of time out of his teammate Kyle Felvers recently. Those soft tyres really falling away on the 07 car. He's now 2.5 seconds behind Josh Martin, but crucially being caught slowly by the cars behind. And that actually makes Nicky Taylor's job even more important, but he makes a mistake there and opens the door beautifully for Scott Bugner, who slips through on the inside line. I was about to say that means that Nicky Taylor's defence over Scott Bugner is extra significant, because I think Scott might have the pace here to start eating into that advantage that Kyle Felvers has. I expect Nicky Taylor to not go down fighting here, though he's back up the inside into turn 1. He is going to do everything he can here to keep Scott Bugner back.
Yeah, and Scott lets him have the position, thinking maybe he's going to run wide up the hill, but no. And there's Elliot Dalton-Ayres just letting everybody past. I almost got very excited thinking he was running in the top 5 then, but actually he's probably just letting everybody pass as a back marker, and well done to him for doing so. The BMW crawling all over the gearbox and rear diffuser of the Porsche, though. What can he get doing? He's going around the outside. Andy, this is brave, isn't it, to be outbraking him here, but Scott Bugner needs to get a shift on, and get a shift on he does as he makes the apex into the bus stop chicane, and he gets through into 5th place.
Fantastic driving that, and great respectful racing from both of them actually, because Scott made sure he didn't turn across the nose of Nicky Taylor. Nicky also realised, I think, that he was fighting a losing battle there really, and that there was no point trying to outbrake the BMW. Clearly that Beamer is just working a little bit better right now, so Bugner is into the top 5. He is 3.8 seconds behind Felvers. They gained another 10th or so even through that side-by-side exchange. Let's watch that, 4.6 seconds. 2.8 seconds. What am I talking about? Felvers' times are dropping off so quickly that I can't quite keep up with it on the timing screen. 2.8 seconds the gap. He can see Felvers up the road. I think Kyle's 4th place is in jeopardy here.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And if you're looking at the last lap times going, Kyle Felvers, 1 minute 43. That is it's a second, 1.2 seconds. Even I can't read the timing screen either. 1.2 seconds slower than Josh Martin's previous lap. And he's the slowest out of the top 3. So, on the previous lap anyway. So, opportunities here. And there we go. He's just put in a lap time that is 2 seconds quicker than Kyle Felvers. And he overtook Nicky Taylor on that particular lap. There's a big danger to the top 4. You're not wrong.
Yeah, Felvers must have made a mistake, but I'm pretty sure that was because of the tyres. I think his tyres are just shot, and that's what's making him perhaps slip up. It will be interesting to watch Kyle if we have the opportunity, because there will certainly be, with that sort of time lost, you would imagine you'd be able to see where he's losing it. Oh, here we go. We're riding on board with the Porsche on the soft tyres in 4th place. We've got a professional racing driver here in the commentary box. Jack, what are you seeing?
Oh, God, no. What I saw was a little bit of understeer, at least 2 or 3 times through the through the hairpin. That's a sign of one, the tyres are going off. Maybe they're overheating. He's scrubbing them quite a lot as well to have to get that front end gripped in. And although I'm very impressed with how smooth Kyle is, as I say that, it's again, that's a prime sort of view of the fact that his car's just pushing on and he's struggling for front end grip. The rear end is not necessarily the problem, which is strange to say about a driver who's driving a Porsche, but it's the front end that's just not gripping up. And again, there though, he's spinning the wheels up just to get the rear rotated because the front won't grip. You almost have to hustle the thing round, and we've said so many times in qualifying that it's all about smoothness here at Watkins Glen. We even had Lewis while we were doing the advert after qualifying. He said as soon as you scrub the tyres once on a lap, the lap time is done. It's dead. The tyres are gone. And we've seen him do it about 3 or 4 times. It's going to be a tough 4.5 minutes here for Kyle Felvers.
It really is. And actually, if he comes overall defensive, which he's likely to do and fully entitled to do, he is racing after all. This is for position. He may be on the worn out tyres, but he's fully entitled to defend his position. The trouble is that could well bring others into play. Has Scott Bugner just made a mistake? Well, either way, Nicky Taylor has gone past him again, and that now does relieve the pressure slightly from Kyle Felvers, buys him another second or so, but something just happened there between Nicky Taylor and Scott Bugner at turn 1, and we're hearing, Jack, there may have been contact.
Well, it's hearsay for the time being, isn't it? We'll put it that way, but we do like to stir the pot and add a little bit of drama.
Absolutely.
But Kyle, yeah, in his rear view mirrors or rear view camera, will be probably seeing that and thinking, oh, thank God, that's a yellow Porsche behind me and not a camo BMW for the time being. 3.5 minutes to go. It's pretty much the sort of biggest bit of drama that we've got out there on circuit is whether or not Kyle can keep the lap times up just enough. I would say he probably needs to just delve into the 1:43s if he's got any chance of it. He's currently rotating in the 1:44s, which is again about 2 seconds slower than the drivers are behind him per lap.
Rotating being the operative word, because he very nearly did exactly that, coming through that uphill right-hander again. This is the part of the track where he's really struggling. Like you said, just can't get the front end to turn in, and then he's perhaps overcompensating with the right foot, and the rear tyres aren't there to support him either. So Kyle Felvers is really on the struggle bus right now with 2 laps to go, and this 4th place would be some handy championship points for Kyle. He finds himself 40 points off the championship lead. That is held by Joel Lask, who is outscoring him, of course. If Kyle is going to keep hold of any even slim hope of fighting for a championship, he really needs to try and hang on to that 4th place. Meanwhile, Elliot Dalton-Ayres, who definitely has a chance of fighting for a championship, is up alongside Ethan Hill. In fact, he pulls ahead of Ethan Hill, who did not make that too hard at all for Elliot. He's gained a few places already since we last saw him. Can he get any further? Remember, he's got Alec Iyengar ahead of him, who is also on those soft tyres, so you would expect perhaps at least one more place in the offing here.
Yeah, there's every opportunity, isn't there, that Aloc's going to be dropping off the cliff, although he probably already has dropped off the cliff. And I will very quickly apologise. I said that Elliot Dalton-Ayres was pulling out the way of the drivers ahead of him. I think it was John Jones who was registered as 2 laps down. Now it was probably him jumping out the way of everybody else. So Elliot Dalton-Ayres certainly not doing that. And in fact, he's making everybody else jump out the way for him as he jumps through into 8th place ahead of Ethan Hill. And look at this, look at the pace he's already demonstrating here. He's got Alok Iyengar well within his sight. I would say, Andy, that these 2 drivers, Nicky and Scott, they've definitely got Kyle Felvers well within range here with 1 minute and 46 seconds to go. That's probably going to be 2 laps. Every opportunity, I would say. We've had Adrian Felvers come onto the YouTube chat saying that he's going to make it the widest Porsche ever. How aggressive is he going to be on the defense of Nicky Taylor, though? It's a bit of a different prospect when it's sort of your teammate.
Well, so this was my next question then. Teammate or not, does Nicky Taylor help Kyle Felvers? Because actually, they're only separated by a point in the championship, and Nicky is ahead. So Kyle is not necessarily a championship contender, really. He's as much of a contender as Nicky is. I'm not convinced that Nicky is going to just sit behind him, especially if he feels under pressure here from Scott Bugner. But we'll wait and see. We've got a lap to try and settle this out, and the 2 Porsches are nose to tail almost as they make their way across the line. The white flag out then. 1 more lap of racing here at Watkins Glen. All of the action is happening for 4th, 5th and 6th positions, with Scott Bugner the one who really needs to try and make some progress.
Eric Axelson, Joel Lask and Josh Martin are pretty much the top 3 that we've had all race, haven't they? They haven't really been much of a story so far. It's about how can Scott Bugner recover from that turn 1 incident or up the hill. We're not entirely sure where it is, but he's got a good draft on now on Nicky Taylor. Is he going to make the move? He is. He's up the inside going into the chicane. We saw him. He's already done it once this race around the outside. Can he do it up the inside? Yes, he can. No, he's not. Nicky Taylor's going side by side. They make a little bit of contact. little bit of rubbing. There's a suspicion of contact earlier in the race as well, and clearly Nicky Taylor is not giving this one up without a fight.
Absolutely not. That was intentions made well and truly clear by both drivers, neither backing out. And earlier on in the race, of course, they went side by side through there with Bugner on the outside, and Nicky sort of allowed him to turn in. That time around, though, no such luck. So that was very, very physical racing indeed. Nicky stays ahead, and the question will be whether or not he stayed within the confines of the racetrack there, but we shall see. Right, up towards the final few corners we go. What it has done is probably let Kyle Felvers off the hook again, and Kyle probably owes Nicky Taylor a bit of a favour after this one. Oh, Bugner off the road completely as he comes through turn number 8. This has been a very good defensive drive from Nicky Taylor that has really saved Felvers his 4th position. Right, across the line comes Eric Axelsen, his 3rd victory of the season, and he does it in style, once again winning from pole position, and becomes only the 2nd driver to do that so far this season. Joel Lask, Josh Martin and Kyle Felvers 2nd, 3rd and 4th, with Nicky Taylor 5th and Scott Bugner 6th. Just realised mid-sentence I was talking utter rubbish. I mean, the first person to do that twice this season, Eric Axelsen, and continues the run of pole-to-race victories that we've seen in Race 1 every week this season. Lots to talk about there in that first race, Jack. Quite a few conversations that I suspect will rumble on for a while, but entertaining stuff behind the leaders, where actually Eric Axelsen made that look very easy.
Yeah, I was going to say, there is lots of interesting conversation to be had, and we won't be having any of them with the top 3 in the interviews, because, of course, they sort of drove off into the distance and didn't give us much to natter on about. But we will be having a quick chat with Eric Axelsen, Joel Lask, and Josh Martin in about a minute's time. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back, everyone. A very entertaining opening race of the night here for the Cammus Simulation GTV3 Championship has just been concluded. Unfortunately, as Jack was saying, most of the action happening behind the top 3, but it's the top 3 that we have the pleasure of chatting to after that race. And we kick our podium interviews off with our 3-time race winner, Eric Axelsen. Eric, it's like you've never been away from the top step of the podium. Give you that pole position and clean air and a track that you get on with, and you've just shown us exactly what you're capable of. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, that felt good. I needed that after the last rounds.
It's been a challenge, hasn't it? It must be a bit of a weight off your mind to sort of come back and not prove yourself. We know how good you are, but I think any driver, when they have a rough patch like that, they kind of feel the need to just get the ball rolling again. Do you feel like this is a bit of a relief and now you can just kind of move on into the second half of the season?
Yeah, actually I do. I hope this is like that turning point, and this was a right track to do it on. It feels like the car was like built for this track. It feels so good around here. So yeah, great.
Really the perfect race for you right from the word go. You got off the line perfectly well as well. You really have a knack for getting any car off the line. That was always important there, wasn't it? Because actually, once things settled down, the race pace between the top 3 was not that dissimilar. So how important do you think it was there to try and build that little bit of a cushion immediately?
I think it was very important because that BM is fast, and yeah, so I had about like 1.5 seconds, and I could like control it like maybe like a little bit, but still, if he were to be closer, it would have been tough.
Certainly would have been. Well, Eric, we'll let you go and prepare for race 2, but congratulations on that 3rd victory of the season.
Thank you.
Eric Axelson then getting himself a race win from pole position. Jack, though, has caught up with the man who finished 2nd.
Yes, indeed, I am. It's Joel Lask, and we just heard Eric say that BMW is pretty quick. Well, the driver's pretty quick in there as well, Joel. It's another podium to your name, and you must be fairly pleased, even though it was a little bit of a quiet race come the second half of it. A good haul of points coming your way.
Yeah, that was tough though, to be fair. We know that Corvette's definitely set for this track, and the BM's not. So yeah, it was sort of all or nothing. I was really trying to keep out the way of Josh, to be honest, and just stay out of his toe. But I could match Eric's times throughout the race, but I couldn't get close to him, unfortunately.
I was going to say, one thing I was tempted to ask you is very quickly about your teammate, actually, because, no offense, he had a lot more of an entertaining race from a broadcasting perspective. Were you on the Discord with him, or could you hear him about what he was talking about or anything like that? Because what I want to know from you is what happened at the beginning of the race to your teammate?
It was first time he'd started using a clutch.
Oh,
Thought he'd
really?
give it a go for this one. So yeah, that obviously didn't work too well. So yeah, probably won't do the same for this one.
Has he not practiced that? I feel like that's something you would practice.
It was a last minute thing.
Well, I'm sure he won't be making that kind of mistake again. Joel, I've just realised we've only got 90 seconds until race 2, and I'm sorry, I've spoken to you mainly about Scott, but congratulations on 2nd place, and I'm sure we'll be speaking to you afterwards.
Nice one. Cheers.
Which means we will very quickly have a chat to our 3rd place driver, Josh Martin, who we always seem to have to rush through our chats with. But Josh, not that much to discuss really from your race, I guess. Beyond what was a very good start, it looked like a pretty quiet one.
Yeah, I got a good launch, but I really struggled. Me and Joel had very different lines. So when I felt a bit quicker, but when I got close behind him, I really struggled to actually be able to do anything, and it kind of stabilized because our lines were so varied. So it's a little bit of a tricky one, really. But yeah, 3rd place, pretty solid. Can't complain it too much.
Pretty solid indeed. We know you're good at reverse grid races as well, so we'll wish you luck and let you get on with what should be an exciting 2nd race. Well done, Josh.
Cheers.
So they are your podium finishers then from our 1st race of the night here at Watkins Glen. And as we've said, we are moving very quickly now into the reversed grid race. All of our finishers from race 1 are reversed, so that's everyone with the exception of John Jones, who, as we mentioned, was a non-finisher. So Andy Carroll on pole position. Andy, known to spring a bit of a surprise occasionally in these reverse grid races. He'll have Reese Bell alongside. Reese, as we've also seen, has had flashes of pace tonight. Then Kenny Press and Paul Laramie, Oliver Gibson and Ethan Hill, ahead of Elliot Dalton-Ayres, Alok Iyengar, Scott Bugner and Nicky Taylor to complete the top 10. The red lights go on then. It is the 2nd race of the night here at Watkins Glen, and it's underway now with a cloud of tyre smoke. One of the Corvettes getting a really good start. That might have been Paul Laramie, I think, going up the middle, but it's Andy Carroll who will hold the advantage down into turn 1 for the first time. Laramie up the inside of Reese Bell, who fends him off in the Aston Martin. They're 3 and 4 wide further back, though, and that is where we find our championship contenders, right where they don't want to be, in the danger zone, heading up the hill.
Yeah, it's split into 2 halves already, isn't it? You got Elliot Dalton-Ayres to Andy Carroll, and then you've got Scott Bugner holding up the likes of Kyle Felvis, Alok Iyengar, Joel Lask, Nicky Taylor, Josh Martin, Ethan Hill, and Eric Axelson. Never thought I'd hear myself say those things as Elliot Dalton-Ayres dives up the inside of Oliver Gibson, almost closing the gap between the 2 separate halves of the grid, shall we say, as the top 6 somewhat single file going through, but everybody else sort of having a bit of a scrap behind. It's a good start from Scott, though. It's complete opposite to what we saw in race number 1, Andy, and I suppose he's probably gone away with that clutch.
Yes, seems to be the case. I don't know whether Carl Felvis realises how close he came to being absolutely wiped out by Alok Iyengar there into the inner loop, but they had survived the situation. Up the inside looks Scott Bugner on Oliver Gibson. That doesn't work, though, and Gibson will try to use that rear engine traction up the hill to maybe challenge Elliot Dalton-Ayres. That doesn't work, but he will have the BMW back up the inside. In fact, they're both closing slightly on Dalton-Ayres. Bugner will go through. Can Carl Felvis follow him? He's certainly going to try, and he will be helped if the BMW gives a hip and shoulder to Oliver Gibson's Porsche, which it does. That allows Felvis up the inside or the outside, and Iyengar sideways in the background, and round he goes, and that was Joel Lask. Joel Lask collecting the spinning Alok Iyengar. Lask will continue, but he's pretty much at the back and may have damage.
Yeah, that's a bit of a shame for them. We know these GTV3 cars, they have a very, very strong. They don't take damage lightly. So hopefully we don't see any problems with Joel Lask's car. And it's really just like he's starting this race all over again from a reverse grid perspective. Nicky Taylor is at an attack on Josh Martin, or is Josh Martin going around the outside? I'm not entirely sure as we focus on Elliot Dalton-Ayres holding up to that top 5. And Josh Martin and Nicky Taylor side by side up the hill. Andy, this spells some kind of Armco contact surely at some point with these two drivers going as close as possible to the curbs and the outside walls as well, but the Corvette just about gets his nose and full body now in front.
Like running Eau Rouge, but on a street circuit, those S's, isn't it? It's really high speed and just no room for manoeuvre, but thankfully they avoided contact, and Josh Martin does manage to either move into or hold on to 9th place. I suspect move into, because he started behind Nicky Taylor, of course. Taylor has rather gone backwards here. In fact, neither of the Porsches doing all that well. As far as the tyre situation, by the way, Paul Laramie and Kenny Press, as far as I can tell, the only two drivers on the soft tyres, so they, of course, had reasonably good starting positions and wanted to try and take full advantage of that, but expect them to perhaps struggle later on in the race in much the same way we saw Kyle Felvers struggle in race 1. But Jack, according to Kyle himself, that choice to race on softs in race 1 was not a choice that he made willingly. In other words, he made a bit of a mistake, didn't mean to start on the softs, and made life a lot harder for himself than it had to be.
Yeah, well, half the grid started on soft tyres, so I'm not entirely sure it was a mistake from everybody or whether they thought it was a viable option at one point as Joel Lask goes through on John Jones. But that's just me being a typical commentating cynic. But you know what? If they've obviously learned from their mistakes as Paul Laramie goes round, and I think I was about to say that he put in a purple sector 1, did Paul Laramie? Well, he's not going to be putting in a purple sector 3, that's for sure, because he's gone round and now finds himself in absolutely stone dead last. And there is Oliver Gibson with Scott Bugner and Carl Felvers just ahead. And I think that's Carl Felvers just about getting ahead of Scott Bugner.
It is indeed. So Carl Felvers into 5th place. He has been really the biggest mover so far in this race. He's gained more positions than anyone else. Scott Bugner doing his best to go with him, but of course Scott didn't start that well because he had a bit of a, started better than Carl Felvers because he had a disappointing race in the opener. Looks at the inside of the Porsche into the inner loop, but he's not really close enough to do anything with him there. And so they stay single file. 4 and a bit minutes gone. Andy Carroll still retaining the race lead. He's 1 second clear of Reece Bell with Kenny Press in 3rd. Those 3 are holding on strong at the front of the field, but they've got some quick drivers coming behind. We've mentioned already Felvers and Bugner, but Elliot Dalton-Ayres too, Jack. He is a driver who could do with a result here, and he finds himself, for the time being at least, ahead of his championship rivals.
Yeah, he didn't do too badly to recover his situation in the last race. I think he did finish inside the top 10, although I'll be honest, I can't quite remember off the top of my head. But yeah, a top 5 would be really helpful here. It turns a bad night into an average night, and if that's your worst of the season, then you can pretty much get away with it as the time comes towards the end, as Josh Martin goes through on Oliver Gibson, the Corvette. We know we've heard from both of the drivers and Joel Lask all saying that the Corvette is perfectly suited to Watkins Glen, but Josh is starting to flex his muscles with it as Andy Carroll leads the way. Kenny Press is in 3rd place, just looking for the other Corvette. Eric Axelson, though, still all the way down in 10th position, not seeing the type of speed and form that we saw in race 1 in qualifying.
Yeah, I was about to make mention of that. Axelson really hasn't made much forward progress. Started 14th, of course, on the grid, so he's gained 4 spots, but it's not as many as you might have anticipated. Andy Carroll then continuing to lead. Dalton-Ayres has gone through. In fact, Dalton-Ayres is into 4th position now, I should say, defending from Carl Felvers. Of course, they all gained a place when Paul Laramie had a spin a lap or so ago. That's why they're all now fighting for 4th, not 5th. But look how congested this is getting up the hill. You've got the red, white and blue Ford GT of Elliot Dalton-Ayres, the purple Porsche of Carl Felvers, and to the outside of him goes the grey camo BMW of Scott Bugner. Tries to tough it out on the outside line. That doesn't work. It delays the BMW, and look who is coming. Josh Martin in 7th position, right with them too.
Yeah, I thought Scott was going to try and go side by side, but maybe he's learned his lesson with battling Nicky Taylor in the last race and decided, you know what, it's not necessarily worth it when we're only 6 minutes into this one, as John Jones, I think that was, going very wide on the exit of the hairpin at the top of the hill. So Kyle holds on to that 5th, but again, that's the problem, isn't it? Oh, Josh Martin getting very close to the rear diffuser. I'll finish my thought though. Andy, that's the problem, isn't it? When you attack the driver ahead, if you don't pull it off, you are very vulnerable to the quick drivers from behind, and that is the issue that Carl Felvers is currently facing.
And it takes us back to the conversation we had in race 1, really. Everyone is so evenly matched now, particularly amongst these championship front runners, that when you get a group of them together on track, it's tough to pass, and they have to take advantage of any opportunity that they have. So yeah, you're right. If you are Josh Martin in this situation, you see Scott Bugner go for a move, it doesn't work, Bugner loses momentum just for a split second. Josh kind of has to try and take advantage of that. Now, he wasn't quite close enough that time, but the next time Bugner goes for a move, he will very much have to be wary of the green Corvette in his mirrors. Down the hill they come, and well, what was a fight for fourth is now quickly becoming a fight for second, because Reespel and Kenny Press are being reeled in predictably by these quicker drivers behind. Reespel is doing a good job though to keep Kenny behind, and Kenny actually keeping decent pace considering he's on those soft tyres, and the more of this side-by-side stuff he sees in his mirrors, the better. Here comes Felvers back up the inside, and this time might be about to take fourth place.
Yeah, he did a really nice cutback, didn't he? A switcheroo on the Ford GT, who holds his pace and holds onto the position as well, but he's going to overslow on the exit, and here comes Carl Felvers, and I think there was a little bit of contact there with Scott Bugner, and well, Scott certainly didn't try and take advantage of it, but that was probably ruining Kyle's run into the hairpin where maybe there was an opportunity. He did try and set that up about 3 or 4 corners before, didn't he? But he's going to have to do all the hard work yet again. It was about 12 minutes in that we started to see the, 12 minutes ago, that we started to see the soft tyres really deteriorate and fall off a cliff in the first race. And Kenny Press is evident that that's pretty much going to happen in the second race as well. His lap times are starting to fall away from him, and I'd say on this particular lap alone, he's lost about a second.
Yeah, he has, hasn't he? So we are starting to get into that window now where he may struggle. And, well, that's music to the ears of Reese Bell, who would absolutely love a podium here, but I think his chances of getting one rely solely on Kenny Press getting his elbows out here and trying to defend his third place. The more he does that, the longer he's successful in doing that, then the further up the road Reese Bell might still be able to escape. And, of course, don't forget about Andy Carroll, who's got a 1.7 second lead over all of them. So Andy Carroll having by far the best performance he's had this season, another driver who is getting better and better every season that goes by. Down the hill they come then. Kenny Press, you can see that distance now that's developed in front of him to the green fronted Aston Martin in second of Reese Bell. It's got a real pressure cooker feeling to it, hasn't it, this one, Jack? At some point, this pressure is going to build and build to the point that something happens, but who is it going to be who makes that first move?
Well, it looks like Kyle is going to try it. He was almost going to look for the fake again, but I think Elliot Dalton-Ayres, who's very late on the brakes compared to Kenny Press, this is the problem I think Kyle is now facing, ironically. He wants to make the move on Elliot, but he is got to be wary that he's got to get past Kenny Press as well, and all three of them looking to go past them is Kenny Press and Kyle Felvers make contact as Eric Axelson avoids him on the right-hand side of the track, and I'm not entirely sure how to digest what just happened there. Andy, it just looked like they merged into one, and I suppose that's one of the problems maybe with sim racing.
Well, Kenny had a moment through the inner loop, and I think Kyle saw his chance, got up the inside into the carousel, and then they both just sort of drifted out wide. I don't know whether Kyle had contact from behind or just drove into the corner a bit too hard, but he clearly has damage, and Kyle Felvers' Porsche, which has looked rapid all night long, is unfortunately wounded and destined for the pit lane. So take Kyle Felvers out of the equation. Wasn't someone just saying that had a feeling as if the lid was about to blow off that particular pot? And it did, and it was unfortunately Kyle Felvers who came off the worst. Well, and Kenny Press as well, I suppose, who's dropped even further back and surely has damage of his own to contend with. What does that mean then for the podium battle? Well, Reese Bell now has Elliot Dalton-Ayres, Scott Bugner and Josh Martin queuing up behind him. That is not an enviable position to be in. I'm intrigued to see how Reese Bell handles this, because he is a driver who has been getting better all the time. He wants that first podium, but I'm sure he's also a driver who's fully aware of the fact that those drivers queuing up behind him are fighting for a championship here, and he won't want to be the reason that any of them has a bad result.
No, but while everything has calmed down for probably about half a straight, let's just give a bit of a shout out to Andy Carroll, because leading this race, and we haven't said anything about him because it's been that undramatic, and normally that means very dominating, as we didn't mention Eric Axelson really the entirety of the first race, so I think it's only can be a compliment the fact that Andy Carroll hasn't been mentioned either, but he's absolutely flying, and Reese Bell's done really well. To be fair, Kenny Press did as well, but obviously that incident then has ruined his race somewhat. But yeah, both of those drivers in the top two, but particularly Andy Carroll, I would say, who's got a 1.2 second gap, or 1.5 second gap actually over second place man Reese Bell for the time being. Yeah, big props to Andy.
Yeah, I was concerned for a second there because Carroll did have a 1.7 second lead. It then went down to 1 second over Respell, but suddenly it started to stretch again. So I suspect that Andy had a bit of a moment somewhere. Again, this all really depends, I think, on how long Respell can fend everybody off, because I'm pretty sure that the likes of Bugner and Martin, certainly, and maybe Dalton Ayres too, perhaps have the pace to close in on Andy, but if Respell can fend them off even for a lap here, that might be enough to get Andy Carroll half a shot at a race win, and you know that he is going to fight tooth and nail for it, regardless of who it is that comes up behind him. So, through the final corner we come, 8 minutes left on the clock, and this the battle for second place. Respell, nothing to lose, desperate to try and get himself his first podium with the VRRC, being chased by 3 drivers who are all up near the front in the championship standings, and all of them at the moment outscoring the likes of Eric Axelsen and Joel Lask as well.
Yeah, and the other positive for Andy Carroll is the fact that if Elliot Dalton Ayres is the one to challenge Respell, Elliot's not the fastest out of all of these, but I think that might just be a mute point, because here comes Scott Bugner with a massive amount of grunts up behind that BMW, and that Ford GT trying to go defensive and almost making contact with Scott up the inside. They're almost going to make it 3 wide into the bus stop. Scott Bugner on the outside, and the Ford GT launches his way through the inside and hold on to that position. Respell can breathe to fight another day.
That was dicey, though. A little bit of a bump draft, I think, there from Josh Martin onto Scott Bugner. And that almost led to a bit of a sideways moment. Eric Axelsen, by the way, has got past Oliver Gibson. So Axelsen a bit late to the party, but he is now starting to close in on this group as well. And Nicky Taylor is also alongside Oliver Gibson in the background, and Joel Lask coming with him. Remember, Lask was caught up in that early contact with Alec Iyengar and is only now slowly starting to show his face towards the top half of the field again. So all of the quick drivers, all of the front runners in the championship sort of stuck together now, but behind Respell, who so far, I was about to say, is doing a good defensive job. He hasn't actually had to defend all that much. He's driving his own line, keeping his head down, doing everything right so far.
He is. He's doing a brilliant job, and Stuart Vickers, who I know is watching on the YouTube chat, will be very proud of his teammates, Phoenix Simsport Racing. So it's, yeah, nice to see Reese doing so. And to be honest, we haven't seen the Aston Martin up there, have we? It's one of the cars that we're always mentioning the Porsches, the BMWs, the Corvettes, the Ford GTs, and really the Aston is the one that's been forgotten somewhat. But Reese is really throwing it about up there in the top 3, and deservedly so, is currently holding on to a podium position. And yeah, very, very impressive indeed. And as I was saying before they started throwing everything at each other, Andy Carroll will be happy the fact that it's Elliot Dalton Ayres who is the one attacking Respell, because if Elliot Dalton Ayres gets through, he might not catch quite as quickly as, say, if Scott Bugner gets through nice and clean. Now, they are going side by side yet again, same place, same bit of track, but this time it's a bit more simple for Elliot to hold on to that third position.
I think you're right, though, with one of your observations from race 1. I think Scott Bugner is... well, first time for everything. I think he is struggling with top-end speed, because he comes through the S's pretty well in the slipstream, pulls out of the slipstream, and then it's like he hits a brick wall. He just can't quite complete the move. He can't get fully alongside Elliot Dalton Ayres, who, of course, is running that little bit lighter. Had a reasonable week ago at Kyle Army, but not quite reaching the highs of his double race victory at Istanbul, so he's lost a little bit of weight since then, and I think he's just able to fend off the BMW as a result. So that's going to be Bugner's big challenge. Where can he make the move, given the fact that he hasn't really got that edge in a straight line? As for Respell, well, again, on the early part of this lap, he was gaining on Andy Carroll. That gap has gone back out again, as here comes Bugner to the outside of Dalton Ayres. This is a strange place to try and make a pass, but it might just work. He's got the traction. He's got the outside line, though, into the penultimate corner. They almost lean on each other slightly. Josh Martin is there, too, and Dalton Ayres fends him off, and Martin is off. Josh Martin with a snap of oversteer off into the gravel trap, and that is a rare mistake from the master of car control within the VRRC, and Josh Martin will drop outside of the top 10. I can't quite believe what I just saw, Jack.
No, I can't either. And the only thing I can believe is the fact that Dave is probably in the YouTube chat trying to clip that now. That's amazing. It's Scott Bugner. Scott Bugner parked on the side of the road. That's on the pit straight, just towards the exit of the pits. Scott Bugner just stopped. We have absolutely no idea why. We'll try and get information for that as quickly as humanly possible for you. But that is, again, 2 massive stories. Josh Martin, Scott Bugner, all happening within 10 seconds.
Well, I know it's our job to tell you what's going on, dear viewer, but I haven't got a clue what's going on. Certainly with Scott Bugner, that is a truly bizarre situation. Out of fuel, maybe? Either that or just a hardware issue, perhaps, that has seen him pull over to the side of the road. But that is big, big news for the championship. Scott Bugner was third in the points. He moved back ahead of Elliot Dalton-Ayres, I think, actually, after his result in race 1. So he was second in the points coming into this one. It is all just falling into the lap of Andy Carroll and Reece Bell. Yes, they've still got some defending to do. There will be 2 laps to go at the end of this one, but all of their challenges, one by one, seem to be falling by the wayside. We've already established that Elliot Dalton-Ayres is not the fastest driver in this group of cars behind, but he is now closing in on the Aston Martin. And Jack, Eric Axelsen, out of nowhere, is knocking on the door of a podium.
Yeah, God knows how he's got there, to be honest. It's amazing, isn't it? Because we were saying he's had an underwhelming race. All of a sudden, there's a race victory in it for him, really, because we were talking about them catching up to Carl Felvis in the first race. These 4 drivers are closer than that gap was in the first race. So, I mean, Elliot Dalton-Ayres will probably be cursing the fact that the Corvette, the darker green Corvette, is now the one hunting him down. He was probably quite satisfied with the defence that he was putting up against Scott Bugner earlier on, but now all of a sudden, a pole position man and a race winner from earlier this evening is now piling the pressure on, isn't he? I'm sure over the course of the next 3 laps, because I think that's all we're going to have time for, maybe even only 2, it's going to be a bit of a test for Elliot's resolve. But a more popular podium you will not find in the VRRC than Andy Carroll and Reece Bell being 1 and 2. It's been a long time coming for both of them. I'm just hoping we're not giving it the old commentator's curse talking about it with 2 minutes to go.
Well, look, this is the difficult part of our job. Again, it is our job to sell the story that we're seeing in front of us, but sometimes you just kind of want to ignore what's going on at the front of the field for fear of putting the mockers on them. But Andy Carroll is driving the race of his life. He has had a win with the VRRC before. I do now remember a reverse grid touring car race at the Norris Ring. I presume that was actually our last touring car championship that he was victorious in. But he is going to have some work to do here because that gap is coming down. Reece Bell closing in, and Jack, you will understand this. I know I've been in this position before as well. When you don't win races very often and you find yourself in a position where you could win a race, those last couple of laps seem to last about half an hour, and it is so easy to fall out of that rhythm. Let's hope that doesn't happen to either Andy or Reece, though, because they've driven an exemplary race so far.
Yeah, it's amazing, really. You almost start to get a little bit tired and distracted, or at least I did when I was in the real car, and you start sort of overthinking everything because you're trying not to get distracted. You're overthinking the fact that you want to focus on the race, and you end up focusing too much, overdriving, missing your braking zones, missing your apexes, basically ruining everything that you do in practice and qualifying and for the rest of the race. And all of a sudden, the people are behind you have started to close that gap, and they're on top of you all of a sudden. But to be fair to Reece Bell, I don't think that's the problem that's plaguing him at the moment. His last lap was less than a 1/10 of a second slower than his best lap that he's put in this race so far. And in fact, it was actually only about 200 of a second slower than Andy Carroll, who's leading the race. So really, Reece Bell is coming on strong exactly when he needs to. Really impressive mindset from Reece, and application of everything he needs to do, really. If we're sort of out there, and we quite often said when Kyle and a few other sort of younger drivers were jumping into VRRC, trying to give them sort of inadvertently give them tips on the commentary, look at Reece Bell doing exactly what he's doing now, because he's absorbing that pressure. And as I said, touch wood, we're not giving them the commentator's curse.
He's gaining on Carroll as well, you know, another lap, and he might have had half a chance of the win. I'm sure I saw someone off the road in the background, maybe not. Here comes Eric Axelsen to the outside of Elliot Dalton-Ayres, and there's contact. Axelsen off the road now, and that was a definite hip check there from Elliot Dalton-Ayres, and through will go Nicky Taylor, through will go Joel Lass, who was off the road at this very corner on the opening lap of the race. This has been a sensational second race of the night, probably race of the season for many reasons. There's been some really good battling, but some really great storylines to come out of it as well. Andy Carroll, out of the final corner, will claim his first victory of the season in the Cammus Simulation GTV3 Championship, and Reece Bell, his first ever podium with the VRRC. What a feel-good story for both of them, and a fully deserved race win and second place as well. I know that was a reverse grid race, but that was still a valid pair of results for the pair of them. I am so happy for them. Elliot Dalton-Ayres third as well of the championship contenders. Elliot came out of the the best, and with a really good defensive drive and a car that I don't think was the quickest out there. Nicky Taylor in 4th, Joel Lask in 5th, and Eric Axelson 6th. To that contact with Elliot Dalton. So that's the one caveat to put on the really impressive defensive drive from Elliot that I just mentioned. There was that contact on the final lap. I wonder if that may have some repercussions. We will find out in due course, I suppose. We're going to give the podium drivers a chance to catch their breath, give us a chance to catch our breath as well, and take a very short break. We'll be back with what I suspect will be a set of very excitable podium interviews in just a couple of minutes' time. Welcome back, everyone, to Watkins Glen, where we have just witnessed a fantastic second race of the night in the Cammus Simulation GTV3 Championship. Some really popular podium finishes, all three of them, actually, but in particular, really, our race winner and runner-up, both of whom we don't get the chance to chat to all that often on the podium, so we're going to take full advantage of that now and kick off our post-race interviews with our race winner, Andy Carroll. Andy, that doesn't sound bad, does it?
Didn't expect to hear that in this series. Oh my word, that was... Oh, I think the last 4 laps of that race, all I could hear was my heart thumping out my chest.
It is a remarkable feeling, that. In fact, myself and Jack were talking about that as well in the closing stages, because you'd driven a perfect race up until that point. You deserved to be at the front. You'd held your own. You were running a strong pace. Those last couple of laps, I think we could almost sense that edginess starting to come in. It's so hard to keep those nerves under control, isn't it? Because you knew that the slightest mistake, it would probably not just cost you the win, but maybe a podium too.
Yeah, the gap to Reese never went really above like 1.7 seconds. And then it would drop back down to about 1.2, and it was just back and forward the whole race. And I was just, he just did not let up. And yeah, he was quicker, I think, through the first sector of the lap, and I think I managed to be a bit quicker through the sort of middle sector. But it was just constant pressure. I got to take my hat off to him, because he drove, especially as he had guys right behind him all the way through. So to sort of stay out in front of those guys as well as keep the pressure on me, that was fantastic.
And it certainly was. As I said, you drove really well. But interesting to hear you say, you didn't necessarily expect this. Okay, you can never expect race wins. We've been talking all night about how competitive this grid is these days. But was it something about this car that you felt perhaps you weren't quite going to have the pace even in a reverse grid race to get the win? Or, is it just a sign of how competitive this grid is now that you can't take any of this for granted?
Yeah, it took me about three rounds to get a setup that I kind of felt a bit more comfortable with. The first sort of 3 rounds, I was really struggling with the car, particularly in the race. but I've managed to find a setup that's a little bit more stable for me now. I can push a little bit more. And then at the beginning of that, I took some rear wing off, because I knew that Reese is like a bullet in a straight line. So I had to try and do something to counteract that. And so it was a little bit sketchy in some corners. I wasn't used to not having quite as much downforce. But yeah, it seemed to do the trick, thankfully.
Well, absolutely. You handled all of that really well. Not a single mistake that we saw out of you anyway. And we're also happy to see you on the top step of the podium. Andy, a huge congratulations. And hey, let's hope we can have a few more of these chats in the near future.
Let's hope so. Thanks, Andy.
Andy Carroll then victorious for the first time this season here at Watkins Glen. And if you thought that was a happy driver, I suspect we're about to speak to, in a way, an even happier one as Jack catches up with our runner-up finisher.
Yeah, massive, massive congratulations. Reese Bell on the podium, second place here at Watkins Glen in the Aston Martin, and you must be absolutely buzzing with that. We think it's your first VRRC podium. Please do tell us that we're not wrong in that, because that makes this an extra special moment.
It is my first podium. I've been working pretty hard to get a chance to speak to you three in the kind of commentary booth.
Not sure it was worth the effort, mate.
Well, we're here now. I've had a few thoughts. I've had a few close calls. I had a terrible first race, and that was absolutely my fault. My mistake. But honestly, I just want to dedicate, my second place to Stu, my teammate. It's not super easy for us to race sometimes. And Stuart isn't here tonight, and I just wanted to say that there was extra motivation for me to make sure that we took home a whole bunch of points for Phoenix.
I was going to say Phoenix Sim Racing. I believe Lewis had a chat with you in one of the first rounds since you made Phoenix Sim with Stuart, of course. But what does it mean to you to get the first podium with this team specifically? Obviously, you've already given it a tribute to Stuart and everything like that. But you guys have worked extra hard to be here and everything. And what's it like flying the flag and making this moment with them?
It's absolutely massive. Like, if one person who suffered with mental health issues like I do, or a type of disability like Stu does, saw me and thought maybe I could do it, that would be absolutely worth it. It's worth all of the hours practice. It's worth all of the time that I've spent with everyone. And to be honest, everyone on the grid at VRRC has helped me get up to speed. There isn't a single person that I'd say has been anything but welcoming, to be honest.
Well, that's what we love to hear, love to see, Reese. It's been absolutely brilliant. But we will get on to a little bit more of the traditional nitty-gritty bit of the interview now. That second race, that was difficult, wasn't it, at the end? Because you had Elliot behind you, but then behind him, at all times, it seems, was a championship contender, or another championship contender, whether it be Eric Axelson, Scott Bugner, Kyle Felvers. Did you see that at all and start thinking maybe this wasn't going to be your night?
So, as you may have guessed up to this point, I am a bit of a strategist. So in my head, me and Andy, we were just going to race for the first couple of corners, maybe. But I knew that all of those people will come in. And if me and Andy start battling, which I love, battling with Andy along the way, we've managed to find each other on track a lot. But I knew that those faster people will come in. So I knew that I just had to keep doing the lap times that I was doing. And then it would just make it more and more difficult for them to catch up. And thankfully, Elliot is nigh on impossible to get past if he gets in front of you. So that really helped me kind of as my kind of rear gunner,
I was going to say, he is very difficult to get past, and we'll be hearing his perspective from the race in a couple of minutes' time with Mr. McEwen. But Reese, I mean, last sort of question about the race, and I suppose of the interview as well. The end of the race, me and Andy were talking about how hard it is to absorb the pressure, and all of a sudden you start forgetting everything that you know about how to drive a car because you're so excited that you might get on the podium, sort of thing. You got quicker. You were within 1/10 of a second of your fastest lap on the penultimate lap of the race there. I mean, what's the secret? Because that is gold dust type mentality.
I think I'm just really lucky. Me and Elliot get a lot of chance to practice together, so we kind of really give it to each other in practice. So when it comes to the race and I've got Elliot and a bunch of really fast people behind me, it doesn't feel as different to just a normal practice time where me and Elliot have sort of gone at each other for a few hours.
I was going to say, I think you're doing yourself a disservice there saying it was lucky, because that was Pure skill, Reese. Big congratulations on the second place. And we've decided that although you and Andy, it was a toss-up between you and Andy, Reese, you are the driver of the round for this evening for absorbing all that pressure and just the momentous occasion it is for you. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, all for Phoenix. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, that's brilliant stuff. As we said, a real feel-good pair of stories there at the end of the night. We must not forget, though, our third-place driver, who also put up a sterling defensive drive in that race. Elliot Dalton-Ayres getting himself onto the podium for, I make this now the 5th time this season, Elliot. So you're now, I think, joint with Joel Lask for most podiums so far this season. That's not a bad record to have, but my word, you had to fight for that one.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's probably the most defense I've ever done. I mean, I think I had Kyle, Scott, and Eric both, all trying to get past, but it's just kind of like just defend because they're all championship rivals, and I don't want them to outscore me. So just thinking about points. So yes, yeah.
It certainly adds to the pressure, that, doesn't it? But it's a nice problem to have, that whole, trying to watch the points and really thinking about who you're outscoring and who you need to perhaps beat. Are you enjoying being in this situation? Because it's not one we've really seen you in before.
Yes and no, because it's so much more pressure being at the top of the standings with points and that, but it just brings more good racing, which I really enjoy. So yeah, there's a bit of a pro and cons to it, so yeah.
It's been a really strong middle part of the season for you. How confident are you then that you can keep that going into Fuji now? A very different kind of track that we head to in a week's time. Is that a track that you think will suit you, will suit the car? It's quite important, isn't it, for you to keep this momentum going?
I have no idea. I've never practiced Fuji, and I think there will be a lot of practice going in to try and get up to speed, but just this car with the way it's so slow in a straight line. I mean, compared to Reese's Aston, it's so slow.
Well, there is one particularly long straight at Fuji, so you might want to fit the afterburners for that one. But Elliot, I'm sure you'll find a way of scoring well. You do seem to be able to do that at the moment, and you've continued that again here tonight, despite not having the fastest car, really, getting yourself a pair of decent results. Well done.
Thanks, Andy.
So there you have it then. 3 very happy drivers, I think, for slightly different reasons. Jack, with their podium finishes there. Obviously, we covered at length the real great stories behind Andy Carroll and Reese Bell, but for Elliot as well, a significant result that, and I suspect it will mix the championship up quite nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one last note on the interviews. It was nice to hear the excitement of getting onto the podium. Sometimes we do forget about how exciting esports or sim racing or racing in general can be. So brilliant to hear how happy those guys were. Right, Joel Lask on top though with 173 points, and although the second race really didn't go his way early on, a lot of championship rivals falling off the circuit late on really sort of worked into his favour, and he comes away from the week I should say, with 173. Elliot Dalton-Ayres, he's currently in second place, quite a way behind Joel Lask, but 5 points ahead of Eric Axelson, who I'm sure won't be too pleased about the fact that he ended up coming off worse onto the final lap of the race there. Scott Bugner was fourth, although is fourth, but he's tied for third with Eric Axelson. Scott is down to fourth. I'm guessing that's worked out with drop scores. I'm not entirely sure what makes third or fourth out of those two. Josh Martin is fifth place. He's on 146. Oliver Gibson in sixth. Nicky Taylor in seventh. Carl Felvers in eighth. He probably won't be too pleased that he's all the way down in eighth still. He probably had pace to be in the top 5 after this evening, but obviously that race too didn't quite go his way. Andy Carroll, the most recent race winner in VRRC, he's in ninth place. So Reese Bell, after his first ever podium position, is on 107 points and rounds out the top 10, actually on tied points with Andy Carroll. So again, a nice little sort of round out of those guys' evenings.
Indeed so. The tiebreak, I think, is done on race wins, but even I'm not 100% sure. Either way, it doesn't really matter because it's going to change quite a lot, I'm sure, over the remaining 3 weeks of racing that we've got here in the GTV3 Championship. As we've mentioned, we will have Fuji in a week's time. Then we will head to Suzuka, I seem to recall, and then the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit. But we're going to have a look at that in a moment. First of all, though, what else is going on here at the VRRC? As ever, there's a lot going on in the background, and we've condensed it all into one nice, shiny graphic for you. So as we've said, the GTV3 Championship ongoing with 3 more weeks to go. So your Wednesday evening entertainment is here to stay for the next 3 weeks. We head to Fuji, then it is Suzuka, and the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit will complete the championship towards the end of March. We've also got the Time Attack series, which is heading into its 4th week now, the final week of the front-wheel drive tin top sort of mini-series that we've had going on, and it's the Cupra touring car around the streets of Valencia, the now sadly disused street circuit at Valencia, which once hosted the European Grand Prix. That will run until the 3rd of March. You've only got a couple of days to get your times in, but you can join the Discord, join the server, and get yourself out on track and try to beat the times that have already been set. We then head off into single-seater land, and we will kick that off on the 6th of March, the first couple of weeks in the Formula 4 car around the Monaco Grand Prix circuit. We then head into the Formula 3 car at Red Bull Ring, then it's Formula 2 at Bahrain, and I'm presuming that we then move into Formula 1 machinery, but I confess I forget which track that will be at. But you've got another couple of months before you have to start worrying about that. And nestled in the middle of that, our next special event, which will be coming up hot on the heels of the GTV3 Championship, a week after we conclude things in the GT cars at Silverstone. We will be heading to Donington Park and the first of 3 weeks of truck racing, which I am particularly excited about. That is a form of motorsport I haven't ever really had a lot to do with, but it always looks like a lot of fun, and I'm sure our drivers are going to put on a show over 3 weeks. Donington Park, Thruxton and Brands Hatch on the 12th of April, a 3-week mini-series for the trucks. Lots going on here, Jack, in the near future. I'm particularly looking forward to that special event, I have to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've actually covered trucks at Brands Hatch on Easter weekend last year, and it is one hell of a spectacle, honestly. I mean, I know we're going to be doing it in the sim racing, and I know I should be promoting VRRC, but if you've got an opportunity to go watch truck racing in real life, particularly around Brands Hatch on that weekend, it is unbelievable spectacle. They almost Americanize it in a good way, in my opinion. It's a proper show, and the things that are really awesome to drive by the looks of it as well. So hopefully the drivers will embrace that, much like they did the NASCAR special event that we had on before. But yeah, lots to look forward to there, and hopefully everybody signs up and enjoys the time, and hopefully you guys tune in to watch the championships and special events as well, because we do love hosting you for the rest of the evenings.
Indeed so. Speaking of hosting, if you want to enjoy the top-notch hospitality of one Rich Hayden, then you should be coming along to VRRC headquarters on Sunday the 5th of March, because you may or may not be aware the new Formula 1 season begins this weekend, and the VRRC have just begun their watch-along events where you can turn up at VRRC, you can watch the race, and have a go on the simulators. I mentioned that myself, Jack and Lewis have been down there to have a go on the sims, and all of the simulator gear that's available for prizes within our championships is all there for you to have a go of. It's on Sunday the 5th of March, kicks off at 11 o'clock, and snacks and drinks provided. So, I mean, what more could you ask for, Jack? You can come along, watch some racing, you can have a go on some of the best simulators around, and Rich Hayden will even make you a sandwich.
I know, and if you're lucky, he might even leave the room for a little bit as well. But yeah, no, it's an awesome idea, and lots of sort of companies and things do these sort of watch-alongs for various different sports, and it's awesome to have a sort of Formula 1 based version of it at the VRRC. So hopefully that'll be a really good event, and if I didn't live 3.5 hours away, I may well have made an appearance myself. But hopefully, if anybody is local to Leighton Buzzard, then by all means get in touch with Rich Hayden and you can pop along. And whilst you're there, if you want to improve on your racecraft and you want to get a little bit quicker, then there's more than just watch-along events at VRRC. You can do a whole host of coaching as well. We do offer plenty of on-track driver coaching, sim race coaching. You can do it from the comfort of your own home with Rich at the VRRC Centre. You can come to the VRRC Centre yourself and get a little bit of real-life sort of hands-on sim race craft experience and all that sort of thing. And they've got plenty of stuff in there. They've got a VR sim, they've got a motion sim, 4 hooked up. I think all 5 sims are hooked up. At least 4 of them are anyway. And there's a VR station as well. So if there are little brothers or sisters or bored parents even or brothers and whoever else do want to come down and they're a little bit bored, then they can have a go at Beat Saber on the VR PC as well and all that sort of thing, as well as obviously watching whatever's on the TV, potentially F1 highlights and whatnot. So yeah, loads of stuff going on at VRRC. If you want to get a little bit quicker, you want to be competitive, then by all means, send us a very quick message.
You two, if you two were sat in a lesson together at school, you'd be separated. You're like 2 naughty kids, aren't you?
You're the one who pays us.
I don't know what you're saying, sir. Yes, do come along, though. I can tell you, Rich, despite what he might have you believe, is excellent company, and that really is a top-notch place to come and pay a visit if you are interested in sim racing, no matter what level that may be. Right, I think that's enough of selling things for Rich. Let's allow you all to go on and enjoy your Wednesday evening. But make sure you're back again in a week's time, because we really are now into the championship running. 3 weeks left of the Cammus Simulation GTV3 Championship. Fuji, the next destination, as we begin our Japanese double-header before we bring it all back to the home of British motorsport at Silverstone, where I'm sure we're in for another extremely close championship shootout. Be sure to stick around for the final 3 weeks, but for now, from myself, Jack, Rich, Lewis, and the rest of the team here at the VRRC, thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again next week.
Woo!